Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
Maria stood in front of the mirror and examined her reflection. Not that she had not done it before, of course she had. But so, a glimpse, hardly, as if it was an annoying necessity. She just did not consider it necessary to often and thoughtfully, as other women, twirl in front of the mirror. It seemed to Maria that this fuss is a waste of time. There were more important things in her life. How to keep the house in order when it all falls apart. How to cook everything delicious when the money's sometimes 3 cents to a paycheck. How to please the man you love, who is so tired at work that he breaks down. Although, of course, he himself is not a bad man. The mirror was an antique inherited along with other furniture from the old owners of the house, who decided not to remove it, and the new, that is, Maria and her husband, it became a pity to throw away still quite usable things. The mirrored surface in the carved, time-darkened oak frame reflected Maria as she was, with all her imperfections. And now it seemed eerie, phantasmagoric even, and how could she not have noticed them before? What was it necessary to be, in fact, a klutz, to ignore this double chin, thighs like kegs, floating waist, 2 wide manly shoulders, short fingers on the hands, and a crow's nest on the head, and the image in front of her eyes blurred because of the tears that came. No, the tears didn't come. They came in a string that paralleled the tears in her chest and stinging in her nose. Maria bit her lip painfully, so that it was scarlet, but it didn't help much. Just as it didn't help to howl and pound the tables and walls with her knuckles. Nothing could help, and so she simply sank to the floor for the umpteenth time. At first it seemed to her that even to grieve should be decent, and that is it. Comedy here breaks, hysterical, like a little child. But then Maria realized that no one sees her, so she can behave as she pleases, right? The events that led to the fact that now Maria sat on the floor by the mirror and roared happened this morning. In fact, it had begun ordinarily. John had breakfast as usual, scrambled eggs and sausage, and a mound of puffed pancakes from Maria's signature recipe. He drank coffee, and in general, he was now scheduled to work, but he suddenly said he was taking today off. "Why so?" asked Maria, splashing in the foam of detergent. She had already taken the dishes to the sink, could not stand it when dirty stood. "Will you fix the porch?" John vowed 3 months ago that he would fix it, and was terribly offended when she wanted to call a master from the company for this purpose a month ago. He asked her if she was mocking him, if he wasn't a man. And so, the other day, when she almost at dusk did not twist her leg on the gap in it, because late at night ran to the store for dumplings for Boris, he said that he would fix it on the weekend. "No, I'm leaving," John replied, and got up from the table. "Where to?" Maria asked, assuming the answer would be something ordinary. Well, maybe to a friend's house or some other business. But she didn't expect John to say that he was leaving her because he was fed up with the relationship. "John, what about me?" Maria asked when she had recovered from the shock. However, her husband had already left the kitchen and could not hear anything. However, the shock receded only half a step, as a wild animal retreats after a test attack, to then rush full-fledged, opening its mouth. Mary backed away from the sink, and without wiping her wet hands, went to the bedroom which she shared with her husband. John stood there nonchalantly putting things into 2 suitcases. The first was already almost full, and he was clearly in a hurry. "John, but do you love her?" The question escaped her lips. Her husband looked at her as if she asked him to explain string theory on his fingers. Then he smirked in that way that no matter how good you think a man is, he clearly enjoys hurting you with the things he says. "You're just a cozy klutz, and I need sexy. What are you looking at? Don't yell," he added angrily, though Maria didn't utter a sound, just opened and closed her mouth numbly. It seemed to her that the reality around her was not real. It was as bad as it had been when she had snapped her fingers on the door once. It had hurt so bad then that she'd slipped into a life-saving faint, always had a low pain threshold. And now she was balancing on the verge of fainting, like a tightrope walker who had lost his pole, balancing on a cable. If they poke him from behind, by the way, with a rod, they say fall faster. I want it so much. Maria did not know just how to react to such a thing. After all, the marriage earlier, nothing like this, well, did not foreshadow. John, meanwhile, had stowed both suitcases. He zipped them up, picked up the luggage, and strode to the front door. Maria followed. "John, don't. He shook her hand off his elbow and gave her a scowling look that said, "Don't stand in the way." "Well, I mean, over my shoulder and back, but in the sense that don't stand in the way of my manly happiness." My husband opened the front door, and in the hallway swept, holding his tail trumpeted, Cat Tishka. This stray lump of fur appeared in their house 2 years ago, and since then was adored by Maria without measure. It was because of Tishka she first in her life seriously fought with her husband, who did not want to see any animals in the house, and Maria really wanted to. "Yes, I cannot have children," wailed then she, "so at least there will be a cat." This was the main, as she believed, the trouble of their marriage, her infertility. John, however, said he didn't care. He had 1 child already, and he paid alimony on him. But for Maria herself, it was that, as said her therapist, to whom she went to as much as 3 terribly expensive sessions, threw her into the abyss of frustration, that is, the soul of the shreds taken out, making her grieve about what she could not have. Lo, it's the turnip again. The husband swore at the cat. The cat had come back from a walk in such a state that it looked like only a clipper could do the job. John, why? Somewhere in the depths of Mary's consciousness were rumbling thoughts that she must think of something to say that could stop her husband, to keep him from this mistake. After all, there must be words that will remind him alive are not strangers, they are people, which means that he just cannot leave. It is just not natural, as it would not be natural if the rain suddenly poured in the direction from the earth to the heavens. Maria just couldn't believe that it was true. And if John turned around and said that he had changed his mind, she wouldn't have to forgive him. She would just fall on his chest, so dear, so beloved. But it didn't happen. John walked down the stairs, got in the car, drove out the gate, and that was it. Maria took a deep breath. It was so strange. At last the picture of what had happened began to, well, as if it were being internalized by her mind. As if she had put a tasteless caramel in her mouth, gnawed on it, and then suddenly there was a luscious feeling inside, the kind that touches and sharpens to the limit all the senses. Acting as if on autopilot, Maria returned to the house, locked the doors, went into the bedroom, picked up the shirt her husband had forgotten from the floor, returned it to the closet, closed the doors, then stood at the mirror. From the state, close to the one when I would sell my soul for the opportunity to just stretch out on the floor and fall through the ground, brought Tishka twirled around a row of fluffy Yule and rumbled loudly. "Hungry, huh?" Sniffing her nose, asked Maria and wiping her tears because visibility was at 0 rows. Love herself nauseous and unbearable, but the animal is not guilty of anything that should be fed. Responsibility should have before pets, all the same. Driven by these thoughts, Maria suddenly not only fed Tishka, but also herself in the kitchen, drank water, then finished washing the dishes, and then the eyes were bothering. And it turned out that if the hands are busy with something, then the heart a little, but easier. So the day flew by and did the cleaning, had lunch yesterday's pilaf, then all washed everything and even the carpet in the yard, took out knocked out good, hands not sparing, until the shoulders did not ache. Toward the end of dusting the carpet, I cried again, but somehow not so painfully. And of course did not go anywhere at all thoughts. True, during this day they were not directly addressed to Mary's husband's departure, but to what preceded him in their entire lives. She was not born in this city, but far away. There, in a small village, where winter seemed an eternal realm of cold, and the summer was a riot of greenery and colors, so that no tropics can keep up with these beauties, past her childhood and early youth. At school, the girls wanted to be whoever they wanted to be, and Maria was the only one who wanted to be a journalist. What journalism? Her mother shrugged her shoulders. You have a stutter. And I'll manage. Maria replied with stubborn resentment and really found a speech therapist in the district center, and with the money she earned on summer vacations, paid for her treatment with this specialist. And at the graduation she already spoke in front of the whole class, and spoke so beautifully, easily, quickly, clapped for 5 minutes. She entered the university and left her native land for faraway lands. In the university she heard a nerd because no fun and recklessness did not allow themselves, and studied or again worked. Already in her final year of study, she got a job at the local newspaper, and I dreamed of more. Fly high, but it hurts to fall, did not appreciate the impulses of her daughter's mother when Maria came home for a visit. But she only shrugged her shoulders, confident that with everything in life to cope. But in addition to journalism was another passion for Maria: travel. And she changed her job because she really wanted to be able to travel abroad. But at first, there was nothing like that. However, the career developed rapidly, so that she was even able to take an apartment in the mortgage and pay it off ahead of schedule. Well, of course, had to sink on everything for this not 1 year, but in the end was its own place. And then, when with this big goal sorted out, Maria began again begging her bosses to send her somewhere else, well, at least about poachers in Africa, to write. The bosses said that the subject of their publication is finance, not the charms of wildlife. But then, assessing Pado Stoinstetelno finally really sent. That's how Maria ended up in Singapore. She was assigned to make a big report about this city, about its economic and business life. Here would be for us to take an interview. Sighed shortly before this business trip her colleague Selena, who was older than Maria almost twice and from the first day acted as her wise mentor. And who is it? Maria perked her ears. Well, Selena stretched out. You fly to Singapore and you don't know who he is. He's a billionaire, owner of plants, factories, real estate. He is already 81 years old and he still decided everything. Now he has retired from business and is writing a book of advice for young businessmen, telling a lot of things. Many people would sell their souls for an interview with him. I'll get it. Oh, Selena winked. You can't get through to him. There's such a queue. We're like finches next to eagles. I'll get it, repeated Maria and rushed to the chief to ask if there will be room for such material in their magazine when she gets it. I'll make you my deputy if you can, said the chief. Singapore was Maria's first trip abroad, and, as she knew at the time, her only and last for many years. The city stunned, enchanted. It inspired, intoxicated, beckoned. The girl felt like the biggest lucky girl in the world. First, she tried, of course, to officially sign up for an interview and was told that her place in line would be, well, about 600th, and added that Mr. Steve wouldn't be doing these interviews for long. Maria realized that time is running out. Of the press leaked information that his health is getting worse. One day, having lunch in a cafe, she overheard a conversation between two journalists from Australia. Can you imagine? I was forced to give all the material and returned it cut up, said one of them. No, that's out of the question. His colleague shook his head. We are ready to agree on what will eventually go to print. Why are they doing this? I have no idea, snorted the offended journalist. Maria made a note in her mind that no one would take away her material and cut it up. And she'll find a way to get this Mr. Gray to do a full interview, exclusive to their magazine. Meanwhile, all avenues by which she could legally get an interview were closing, and there was less and less time to return. One day, walking through the city, Maria saw a performance of street performers were mimes, and then an idea struck her. The next day in the business center entered an unremarkable woman in a strict gray suit. She, having received the usual pass for visitors because she went to a consultation with a beautician and a light salon which was located on the 10th floor, went to the elevators. But in fact, this person went up to the 20th floor, because without her base, without a doubt, it would have been much worse at the university. Soon coffee arrived, but Maria barely touched it. Steve turned out to her surprise not to be an arrogant old rich man, but an open, friendly man with a sense of humor. He was eager to talk about his achievements and mistakes, about all that his corporation had done over the years, and all that they, unfortunately, had not had time to do. But Mr. Steve expressed the hope that his son would take care of it. And I would take him for your grandson, Maria replied and was immediately embarrassed. Oh, I'm sorry. It's all right, the old man smiled. You're right. From the point of view of nature, I am already old for fatherhood. But it did not work out in my youth. And then, yes, everyone knows about it, fell ill. But thanks to the wonders of modern science, my genetic material was stored in a lab, so to speak, and so Jacob was born. Donor egg. Surrogate mother. Yeah. My first and only love died of measles when we were barely in our 20s. How ridiculous is that? Measles in the 20th century. And that's what I have. But back to our main question. How about I give some advice to the readers of your magazine, to beginners and experienced businessmen, eh? Steve winked at Maria and she nodded. That was quite fantastic, and she imagined what a sensation such an issue of the magazine would make. It could be framed in a gold frame and hung on the wall in the chief's office, and her own career would undoubtedly skyrocket. They talked for a long time. Then Steve apologized and said that he was tired, and besides, it was time for him to take his medication. Maria was also somewhat tired, not because of the interview itself, but because of something that happened in the middle of it. The thing was that it suddenly seemed to her that Mr. Steve dozed off. He bowed his head again, he mumbled something. Then he woke up and apologized. He said that it happens to an old man, a sudden weakness of body and mind. Before Maria left the office, Steve suddenly added, "No editing from us this time. I've given a complete and whole interview. Let the girl decide for herself what to keep." "But father," began the type in the striped suit, but Steve once again reminded that he was the big boss and his son could only throw at Maria unpleasant glances. Back at the hotel, Maria immediately got to work, and worked until the evening, and how much work was left to do. She decided to go out into the city, to take a walk to see everything, and at the same time wanted to find a small cafe to have dinner and get acquainted with the local cuisine. The evening went well, and then, anyway, when Maria returned to the hotel, she noticed that someone had been in her room. Someone had obviously gone through her things. She was, of course, shocked. The hotel management said, "We don't know anything." Mysterious intruders did not touch the cash and even gold jewelry, which she left on the bedside table before going for a walk in the city. But in her papers and her notebooks, where she made all sorts of useful for the journalist notes, someone was digging. That evening, Marie got a call from her boss just to see how she was doing. She complained to him about this strange occurrence, and he shocked her by suggesting that it was probably local competitors who had dropped by because they were hoping to steal a fresh, exclusive story. Maria said that no, they had not succeeded, because that evening she had sketched out the article and even brought a tape recorder with her when she went into town, because she wanted to think a little about the materials she had collected during dinner. The chief warned that it might be worth moving to a hotel with a better reputation, and of course it was necessary to protect all the materials like the apple of the window. Maria promised to do just that. For the next couple of days she was exploring the city, studying it, writing about it, and then one morning she had a toothache. I had to go to the dentist. And there the receptionist told her that all digital things, that is, the main phone and dictaphone, she would have to leave here, that is, at the reception desk of the clinic. Because, they explained to her, such things can interfere with the work of modern equipment installed in the doctor's offices. Maria was upset. It seemed to her that in general, her materials for the article, well, purely theoretically, can become easy prey here on the shelf of the usual, especially since the girls at the reception of the clinic is always somewhere away. In the hotel Maria moved to return was far away. In general, Maria has already, in fact, finished with the article. Practically in her bag was a flash drive with typed draft, which remained only to edit. Phone she was ready to leave, no doubt it was just her personal thing, who needed it here. But what was to do with the dictaphone? And then she remembered about an advertisement. The thing was that opposite the clinic, there was a small private bank, and there was an advertisement that you can rent a safe deposit box, even for foreigners, without any delays. The advertisement said that it was beneficial for everyone, and in particular for tourists who wanted to secure their belongings. Maria went there, but she was disappointed to be told that the ordinary, cheap boxes are out. There are only expensive ones with some kind of tricked-out protection, but there is a unique promotion on their rent. You pay as for 6 months, and you get a year. Maria grimaced. Her tooth hurt terribly, and she had to pay almost $300. The price was unmerciful, but something had to be done. So she paid the long-term rent. Then she went back to the clinic. The tooth was fixed. But after her visit to the dentist, Maria didn't feel well. She decided that she would take a cab to the hotel, and she would pick up the dictaphone from the storage room tomorrow. Tomorrow, by the way, was her return ticket. Maria even dozed off in the cab. Before her eyes flashed all sorts of nonsense. Here she was in a red dress dancing on the roof of a skyscraper with Steve's son. Here she was sailing on a stormy sea, and her purse with an interview was pulling her to the bottom. But she did not give up and rowed to the shore, and behind her back a shark was catching up. Maria snapped out of her dream suddenly as from a jolt, and she was horrified to see that the driver was trying to dodge the collision. "Look out!" she shouted when she realized that a truck was coming at them. "Look out!" The driver twisted the steering wheel, the car spun, and then there was a terrible impact, a fiery pain that embraced the whole body in darkness. Maria woke up in the hospital. The cab driver was dead. So was the driver of the truck. She had survived, but the doctor, lowering his eyes and confused, explained to her that due to specific damages, the car was literally crumpled, crushed into splinters. Due to these damages, she had a badly damaged lower half of her body. There was a penetrating wound, and the doctor explained that she had been saved. She would live and would not even be disabled. But she would not be able to have children. Never. Maria couldn't believe it. Then she did. It was a strange and frightening period in her life. Many tears were shed. How did she not go mad? She didn't know. She lay in hospital for a long time, and the only thing that connected her to reality was, strangely enough, work. A couple days later, Selena's coworker flew into Singapore. She took a vacation at her own expense to support her friend. Also, Maria realized that despite everything that had happened, she could and wanted to finish the article. Selena helped with that. Good thing all the materials really only needed to be edited. Maria was very worried about what she would be billed if the insurance would not cover everything. But it turned out that she had chosen a good insurance at the time. After a while, Maria was able to return home. But immediately upon her return, she felt worse again, and she went to the hospital again. Now she was visited by the boss himself. He, a big man, couldn't hold back his tears and said that it was nothing. The main thing was that she was alive. He then personally brought her to the hospital just out of print issue of the magazine and said that they did not have a better article. He said that as soon as Maria recovered, they were waiting for her, the whole staff. And of course, she could become his deputy, as promised. I don't want to, Maria replied. I'm quitting. Yes, that all worked out in the end, but she couldn't even explain it to herself. But she suddenly realized that she didn't want to work as a journalist anymore. It was as if this accident had taken away not only her ability to be a mother, but had torn from her chest something infinitely valuable that energized her, made her strive for more in this profession. She had some savings, with which for a while it was possible to lurk like an animal that had gone into a hole for a period of winter hibernation. Maria almost never left the house. Food and those were delivered from the stores. First time she still maintained relations with colleagues at work, those visited her. But then it all kind of came to naught, and also did not pass the attitude that the work in the press, well, that it is no longer absolutely not suitable for her. Maria began to look for another job. It didn't matter what kind of job, even if it was as a salesman. At the interview, surprised to see that it is, say, you, my dear, with such education and experience, and claimed such a modest position. In a couple of places even refused. The reasons were not named frankly, but hinted such a person, say, will not fit into our team. Maria was just ridiculous. And she searched further. Once just randomly called the nursery of flowers and all kinds of ornamental plants, and there suddenly said, yes, we need workers. All on the spot teach. We are the main thing that you are hardworking, we're open to new. After working there for a year, Maria made a decision. She sold her apartment. Proceeds for it, by the way, even more than she originally expected, because the neighborhood where the house stood, booming. And with that money, she bought a house in the suburbs. Small, brick, and with a small plot of land with him, where she arranged a garden good. Now she knew it, and so she lived, quietly, lonely. But Maria was quite a young woman of only 34 years old, and because in her youth was not a stranger to novels, and now the heart demanded something of this, and fate threw a chance for personal happiness. She and John met banally. In the train, she was going to the city, on business, needed to pick up some documents from the store for gardeners, where the nursery supplied flowers in pots, and he was returning from his parents' cottage. We got to talking. John was only 8 years older, but he joked that he felt like a grandfather because he was forced to go to the cottage, and his soul does not lie to it at all. He went to the dacha for the reason that his mother and father had fallen ill with influenza, and they managed to catch it in the summer, and they couldn't wait for plantings, cucumbers, and all sorts of things. John and Maria exchanged phone numbers and called each other. She gave him advice because she understood something about farming, though mostly about all kinds of ornamental. Then he invited her to the dacha, and she, timid because it sounded so frightening to go on kebabs to almost a stranger, no matter what happens, but agreed. We had a great time, and something like a romance started, but without bouquets of flowers, candy, and all that romantic nonsense. Just two adults who don't believe in fairy tales. John often said how much he liked the fact that Maria was real. Not like these modern girls who have in mind clothes, lips to pump and nash to couture. John complained about how little modern women understand and accept the role of nature intended for them to be a keeper of the hearth, to take care of their man, and then, when they had everything happen for the first time, he asked Maria to marry him. He said no, he wasn't scared of her scars on her body. Yes, scary, but he understands life is such, and if you turn off the light in the room, it's okay. He said that okay, he does not need children. Vaughn, when he was young, one dragged her belly to the registration of marriage, so he's still 5 years to pay alimony. Maria, when she found out that John was the father, she couldn't understand how he could give up his own child. But then she thought that it is probably she so keenly perceives everything, because she herself is infertile, and they got married. It was modest and quiet. Present were John's parents, who were strangely silent and immediately, by the way, hinted that any relationship with his daughter-in-law are not going to support. But Maria's parents could not come and said that it was too far to travel, and their health is not for traveling. They congratulated majorly over the phone. They in general, by the way, were somewhat dissatisfied with the way of life of their only daughter. They wanted her to study somewhere nearby and live there nearby, so that therefore could look after them in their old age. Maria felt terribly guilty. And family life began. No, Maria had no illusions about it and did not have romantic dreams, like the fact that the spouse will be breakfast in bed to carry. But it was hard to adapt to life with another person. This is not so, this is not so. But after 3 years, as if they have rubbed it in. John worked in a furniture factory, but not in the production itself, but in a warehouse. Maria continued to work in the plant nursery. The budget became joint, and it was also so unusual and in some places problematic. For example, when suddenly it turned out that John had a credit for the phone and he had to pay for it literally most of his salary. Okay, paid off. Then he took out a new loan on his parents' house and started renovating it. And so it happened. Well, Maria's salary was much more, and bonuses happened often in the nursery. She was not just on a good, but on a brilliant account. And so she actively, of course, helped her husband to pay off his debts. Is it possible in a family otherwise? But Maria was not discouraged. She said to herself, where did I need all the money? So, accumulated on the account, and here native people benefit. She was unpretentious in general and wasn't ashamed of it. Since the accident, although most of the scars were on the body, but 2 more were on the face, 1 crossed the forehead, and the second ugly jaw at the chin. Maria usually hid them under thick layers of foundation and powder. She wore the same clothes for years and didn't like to store like other women, especially since they rarely went out with John, for example, to visit. In general, as if they got along together and it seemed everything is normal. And the fact that the spouse who before and did not shine the manifestation of emotions, suddenly completely distanced, well, Maria recalled the words of some scientific article about the fact that love lives 3 years. However, and was it this very love? If she was asked to confess honestly and put in front of the fact that it is impossible to get away from this question, she would say that, no thrill there. But that's not what family life is all about, is it? So she didn't grieve. And that's how it ended. Who did he go to? Why? What was he missing? In the middle of the night, lying on her bed without sleep, Maria stared at the ceiling, which she couldn't see. She turned out the light. I need sexy. She repeated her husband's words and giggled stupidly. Well, he should have thought before, because sexy was definitely not for her. And then came the morning. It brought a strikingly, and for some reason to the point of offensively clear, sunny day and the usual routine of having to go to work. Then it was the weekend, in which a visit to the vet was scheduled. Tishka had to have his regular vaccinations. Then I had to slowly prepare my own garden for winter. It was already September. John never showed up, so the month flew by. Then he called and asked, well, how are you? You're not plotting anything against me? What could I be up to? Maria asked in confusion. I don't know, but be warned, we are serious, said the husband, and it was felt by his tone smiling. Well, we have lived with you so much. You do not be sad. There will be a man for you too, someone. You're a nice woman, household, cozy. Maybe you'll be good for someone. Maria gasped for air because it was unbearable to hear John's patronizing demeanor. Was he really caring in such a peculiar way? Or was he mocking me? I don't even know who you went to. Maria voiced a thought that had long tormented her. Sveka, John replied. I'm secretary. Woo, juicy. And you? No, it's your own fault. He shouted as if Maria was accusing him of something. She didn't blame him. She breathed into the phone and tried not to cry shamefully. I've let myself go. Goodbye. I'll file for divorce next month. Bye, and he hung up. Maria cried after that conversation, so much and inconsolable that she missed that in the kitchen. In fact, chicken soup is cooking ran off the stove and the pot burned. I don't care about you, Maria announced to the soup, though she would have said it to John with great appetite. But don't call him just for that. And then, the spirit wouldn't have been enough for him to humiliate her too much, and he was right about who she was as a common clod. Maria herself did not notice how the time to the evening flew by. What was she doing in it? Yes, just hanging around the house in the vegetable garden digging. Broke, by the way, in the process of digging, something floral, and almost gave herself a slap with a crooked hand. Not only that clutches, so also hands grow like the snag of a March branch. And suddenly the doorbell rang. In general, there was nothing unusual about it. Well, the bell and the bell. But for some reason it made at some deep, subconscious, primitive level tense up. The thought flashed, and maybe I'll pretend that I'm not at home. What nonsense, Maria said to herself, and went to open the door. Tishka followed with his tail. He generally had doggy behavior in some things, such as checking always who came. And if there were strangers, he ran away and lurked behind the sofa or under the closet because strangers are alien and afraid. Maria turned the latch of the lock, belatedly thinking that actually it is necessary to ask who is there, or what if there is a maniac wandering around. And again she mentally called herself a fool, because, well, such a klutz as she was, perhaps even the most unlikely maniac does not need. And from the resentment of the whole world, Maria, sniffing her nose, jerked open the door. She expected to see someone from the neighbors herself called to come in to share flower seeds for next year. And also the plumber from the local home repair service was supposed to come when he was free. But those who stood behind the door were definitely not neighbors and even less belonged to the plumbers. They were two men, one tall, dark-haired, in a suit. And the head pounded, Maria considered instantly what once by virtue of profession was well-versed in costume expensive, very, as well as the watch on his hand. The second dressed a little simpler, a blond man with a stern, intense expression. Maria? The brunette asked. Yes, the landlady nodded, looking questioningly at him. My name is Jacob Steve and we need to talk urgently, the stranger stated. Maria grasped the door jamb and suddenly her knees went weak and she felt sick. Just associations, memories came back of where she had heard that name, where she had seen that man. My father Steve, you interviewed him when you were in Singapore, patiently explained the unexpected guest. I remember, Maria said with numb lips, but I've been out of work for a long time and I'm aware of what happened, Jacob said. Of course I should have called you first, but this isn't a phone call, and I need to talk to you in person. Maria stepped aside, waving her hand invitingly. Come in. Alexander Smith, my assistant, Jacob announced his companion, and the blind man said hello to Maria, who somehow thought, just on an instinctive level, that this guy was by nature terribly silent and frowny. Forgive his unbearable English. He's from Sweden. Mine is not ideal either, shrugged Maria and almost tripped over Tishka, who, breaking all his cat principles, wrote out figure eights at Alexander's feet, as if he was his old acquaintance, who brought a mint. Oh, and he usually doesn't approach strangers. Tishka, shoo. Sorry, Maria tried to grab the cat, but he slipped away. Now all your pants will be soiled in 6. Hi, Tishka. Alexander suddenly sat down in front of the cat, and it dived under his palm, rumbled with affection. It's okay. You shouldn't send him away. Maria sniffed her nose again. She was unpleasantly hurt by Tishka's affection, as if he had betrayed their friendship. You sit down, Maria said, as they entered the drawing room. Yes, it was a shame to be in front of such a guest for the mess. She nervously grabbed her fall coat from the chair, which she was mending because she couldn't afford to buy a new one, if only because this month she was already in default on the loans John had taken out. And Maria had no idea what the rules of repayment would be after the divorce. followed by the haunting thought that she would probably have to continue paying off this financial nightmare until the end. "Would you like some tea?" she asked awkwardly. "Thank you," Jacob answered for himself. Saying to him, Jacob added for his companion. Maria went into the kitchen. She found that she was out of brew. She had to put a handful of tea bags in the kettle. The woman also poured gingerbread and candy into a vase. Maria had no idea why this man would come to her after all these years. But so far this event, despite all its unusualness, was perceived a little sleepy and aloof, as if it was overshadowed by the pain of what her husband had done. "Here, I wasn't expecting guests," she excused herself as she unloaded the tray on the table. Tishka did not waste any time stomping on the armrests and back of the chair where Alexander sat, and then he climbed into his lap, and the man just waved his hands, saying, "What can you do? I have to stroke and scratch this woolly splendor." Jacob barely touched his tea, apparently just to be polite, and then he spoke. He reminded Mary that she had interviewed his father, reminded him of the fact that afterward, as he had learned, she had placed the tape recorder containing his tape in a storage room. He also expressed sympathy. He said he was unaware of the unfortunate thing that had happened to her in Singapore. Maria nodded. This was normal. In fact, she was just a journalist who had come for an interview. It was not like they could track the fate and health of every member of the press that the management of the firm had contact with. Jacob then went on to say that after his father's death, he had taken over his father's business and had been running it quite successfully for some time, as well as trying to implement what Steve had been working on in the last years of his life. "I'm sorry," Maria said, "but I don't quite understand. What does this have to do with me?" "That article, a copy of it was sent to you, and it seems that you were not against its content, if I remember correctly." "There was nothing wrong with the article," Jacob sighed. "I should apologize for taking so long to get to the main topic, but I just need you to get the big picture right," he continued. He told us that Steve's dream was to develop a cleanup technology that would significantly reduce emissions from industry. Steve in his time received various education, and he also had a cousin older brother who was a chemist by profession, and they worked together on all this. In the last years of his life, Steve liked to say that he was on the verge of an invention that would turn the modern world upside down, thanks to which the oil, engineering industry, and many other industries will stop polluting the planet so much. After his death, going through his father's papers, diaries, and naturally the many files on his computers, Jacob discovered that he seemed to have gotten a lot farther than he said he had. Steve's brother had died a year before the owner of the corporation himself had passed away, but he had managed to get their joint project off the ground. In fact, Steve was ready to introduce to the world market specific technologies that could change many industries. He treasured this project very much, and he kept it a secret. Everything that was related to the final version he hid, literally put it in a stash. Jacob clarified that the stash wasn't very big. It just held flash drives, blueprints, some other documentation. The stash could be in one of the mansions Steve had inherited. It could be in the garage at the mansion or in the garden, or maybe on one of his yachts. In general, the usual search will lead to nothing. "But what about the man who helped your father hide it? Couldn't he tell us where it was?" Maria asked. Jacob answered that his father had been confined to a wheelchair during the last months of his life. Before that, he had been able to get around. Not briskly, but he could. And lately, he was just traveling between his properties. The situation was complicated by the fact that Steve had always, all his life, loved all kinds of puzzles and had stashes of those same jewels and valuables. Most of the hiding places were found, but Steve could hire a craftsman who could keep his mouth shut, or he could build such a hiding place himself when he felt very well. And now, where to find his main project? And what does all this have to do with me? Maria was completely confused and bewildered. Directly smiled Alexander, who before that, in fact, did not interfere in the conversation, and Maria shivered. She felt that she was caught in some kind of trap, and the door has already slammed shut. "Do you remember talking to the girl at the front desk when you left your father?" Jacob asked. "Well, yes." Maria nodded. "You see, all these years I've been looking for clues that might tell me where to look. You see, my father passed away from a heart attack. He was on medication, but that night, he decided not to. He said they gave him headaches and mental confusion, and he was gonna talk to me the next day. He wanted to give me everything he was working on. My father thought that once he missed his medication, he wouldn't get hurt, but it was the opposite. It was a serious drug. My father didn't tell me his secret. I had to look for it. I went through his journals, his papers, and I found something. It seems the key to the project's location was a poem. A poem? Maria was surprised. Exactly, Jacob nodded. My father, he was a versatile man. When he was young, he was into poetry too. He wrote something. Shortly before he died, he started writing this poem. I have the first half, but the second half. Now Maria, Jacob was looking at her hard. You see, I recently decided to once again interview everyone who had worked for the corporation and who might have had contact with my father shortly before he died. I talked to all the servants as well. I was looking for any lead. All of a sudden, this nice girl named Monica remembers that when you were chatting at the front desk. Yes, I went up to her. Maria nodded. To say it wasn't her fault that I snuck into the office without permission. I said it was just me being a journalist, ready to do anything. And you also mentioned that Steve was a very nice man, and that you felt sorry for him because you had elderly parents. I was a very late child, Maria sighed. My mom gave birth to me at 44 already. You mentioned, Jacob continued with some pressure, that you felt sorry for Steve because you saw how bad he was, that he fell asleep in the middle of your conversation, and he was talking in his sleep. It's been so long, Maria said. I don't remember everything. He was talking in his sleep and reading a poem. You said you was mumbling lines of a poem, and I suppose then my father could have voiced the missing element of what is the key. My father loved this kind of puzzle. There was silence in the room. All you could hear was Tishka purring. You see, my father had a habit of repeating out loud the poems he composed. Therefore, I suppose that then your dictaphone got a recording of the second fragment of the poem, which is the key, the clue to where to look for his project. But I haven't had a tape recorder for a long time, Maria frowned. Right, you left it in the bank's locker, Jacob grinned, and I already know how it was. And then, yes, I understand, you had an accident. You didn't have time to take the tape recorder back, and there was no point, because the article had already been written. You forgot about it. Yes, I forgot, Maria nodded. I didn't have time for that. I didn't really need him anymore. That's probably why I didn't remember. And did. Maria swallowed hard. She had a strange feeling that she was getting more and more entangled in this story, and just as she was getting further and further entangled in it, after the safety deposit box lease expired, shouldn't it have been thrown out? Specifically, this bank has a rule of thumb: use first-class safe deposit boxes. If the customer doesn't show up, can't be opened until 20 years after the lease expires. But Maria took a deep breath. You can't take it from there? With your influence? Theoretically, I could hire extra-class burglars, Alexander interjected thoughtfully again. But I'm afraid that such a scandal, if it all comes to light, would not be good for the company's image. The thing is, Jacob clarified, that access to the safe, as you remember, is protected by modern technology. It requires your voice, your fingerprint, and a retina scan to open it. And that's not counting your personal presence, your signature on documents. Maria. Jacob sighed. I was just unlucky you chose this vault when the neighborhood was full of simpler ones. Well, I just went to the first place I found. Maria swallowed hard. And they had this big ad, special terms, the most secure vault for your valuables. And now I need you to come with me and get the tape recorder. Hand it over to me, Jacob finished. Even though your lease has long since expired, you can still take what you put in the box. The room was silent again. Tishka kept rumbling. What? Maria understood perfectly well, but she asked again. No, she explained. Why not? Jacob asked, squinting his eyes. But I don't. Look, you show up at my house and demand. I don't care about that. Actually, I'm not demanding, but making a business proposition, Jacob grinned. Maria, what's scaring you? Just to fly to Singapore for a couple days. Take the tape recorder, give it to me. I'm prepared to reward you handsomely, of course. Because you have, he squinted. You're in serious financial trouble. How do you know that? It's not hard to find out. Did you? Maria got up from her chair. Were you spying on me? Gathering the right information about some people is very easy, Alexander said in a conciliatory tone. Maria, you're a reasonable man. Jacob followed her up and was at her side in a matter of moments. His palm rested on Maria's shoulder and squeezed, either patronizingly soothingly or predatorily possessive. Listen to me, I just want what's mine. And you, how about? And then he named a sum of money that Maria would not have earned in many, many years. It was a fantastic amount of money. Just for a tape recorder, Maria squeaked. Believe me, what it can lead to. Costs a lot more than that, Alexander grinned. We can leave tonight, Jacob continued. You went to Turkey on vacation last year, didn't you? So you have a passport. I don't have time to think, Maria grinned. But I understand you really need it. And well, I have nothing to do anyway. She waved her hands. My husband, he left. Oh, what about me? I have to take a couple of days off work. You'll have to make a phone call, Jacob said. And put the cat down, Maria continued thoughtfully. Well, the neighbor, Aunt Betty, will take it for a couple of days, for sure. So you can pack? Maria was about to nod and say yes, quite, but then there was a strange sound of someone sneezing somewhere in the room. And it wasn't Maria. And it wasn't Alexander or Jacob. And it certainly wasn't Tishka, who was already sitting on the floor and washing his tail. The cat, by the way, suddenly became alert and went to the closet. It was a large closet, delivered along with other old furniture from the previous owners of the house, and stood in the corner of the room, and it stored all sorts of junk. And then the closet doors opened. At first, John was jubilant. He won. He is a real man. He left a clutchy wife, and next to him a real beauty. Yeah, Ariana was a piece of cake, and he was good at figuring out how to approach a girl like that. It was clear that if she was a beauty, then it would not be enough just jokes and kisses. It was necessary to support her financially. John is so tired of the bland, boring, gray mouse of his wife that he began to spend money on a passion, especially since he had recently taken out another cash loan. Thought to upgrade his car, but priorities changed as soon as Ariana said that she did not mind living together. That's when John left his wife. And for the first time, it seemed that they lived wonderfully. Ariana was affectionate, gentle, responsive. She did not nag, did not grind her nerves. True, she could not cook by herself. She ate yogurt, mysterious smoothies made of all kinds of greens and omelets. John, who always liked to eat good food, was a little angry, but then he got over it. It was his clutch on cook so that the fingers lick. But she was sexy. He also had to accept the fact that Ariana didn't like to clean the house, and she loved to watch Turkish TV series, letting natural tears and snot over all sorts of strange men with cubes on their stomachs. And then something happened, or rather, a very simple thing happened that John ran out of savings, which he generously spent on a young mistress, and Ariana noticed it very soon, and made it clear how dissatisfied she was with this state of affairs. John tried to borrow money from friends, tried to take a loan, but there was no money now. In fact, there was only enough left to buy a snack before the paycheck. And that's when Ariana suddenly changed. She turned from an affectionate sweetheart into a fury and declared that she didn't need freeloaders and men who couldn't take care of their women. John's things, who was babbling about his love and did not want to leave, literally flew off the balcony. John was picking them up, cursing at how mercantile some women are. And then he realized that he had nowhere to go but back to his ex-wife's house. Theoretically, of course, there was still his parents' apartment, but John knew only if he returned to Maria, he could get back on his feet. She helped him with money, and she'd give him a good salary, and delicious food again will be, and that Maria will take him, John did not doubt, because, well, who but him? Such a klutz could still be needed. Singapore. We leave tonight, Jacob explained. All expenses, of course, are on me. I'm willing to compensate you for your time, and also, I'll offer you some money for your silence. Once again, the room was silent. Maria looked from one man to the other. She had the distinct feeling that she was in a Hollywood movie, not a romantic comedy, but a melodrama, or maybe a thriller. She was shocked by Jacob's request, but she was ready to agree, not even for the fabulous reward, but for humanity's sake, because it was his father's legacy. She wasn't prepared for the fact that John would be traveling with him. John, please don't say anything else, okay? We'll talk about everything when we get back, okay? Only a few minutes ago, she had slapped him and felt she had the right to do so. But now she was suddenly ashamed of her behavior. To humiliate a man like that in front of strangers. Just a few minutes ago, Maria was full of angry resentment at her spouse, who openly went to another, who, you see, sexy, and now with disgust at herself realized. And after all, she is ready to forgive him, to believe that he's just confused. After all, they have so much ties together. After all, not 1 year lived together. Yes, a man has strayed, but how many have heard that it happens in life and should be given a second chance to save the family? So what? How can she be now? Maria felt that she was ready to cry now from all these thoughts, but she held herself back by an effort of will, and thanks to the fact that there were practical matters, she had to pack her things. She had to put Tishka with a neighbor. "I have to go to my parents," John said, "to get some things. I'm staying with them for now." "Good," Jacob said, and then he opened his wallet and handed John some of the largest bills he could find. "For a couple hours of your silence, for starters. The rest when the deed is done." John tucked the money into his pocket, nodded, and literally dashed out the door. In the evening, they finally drove to the airport. Maria sighed. Well, of course, what did she expect? Surely a man like Jacob could afford to fly in a private plane that looked like a palace inside. "How do you know people like that?" John hissed at her as they got up to the cabin. "And why do we live so badly if you have friends like that?" "He is not my friend," replied Maria tiredly, "and I've only seen him once." "Oh, John, give me a break, please." "I really missed him," he began, but Maria took the opportunity to rush over to Jacob and ask him how long they'd been flying for and how they were doing. She avoided the unwanted conversation. Then I sat down in the chair next to the one Alexander was sitting in. In front of this pair of chairs was a small table on which there was fruit, light snacks, drinks. I love to look out the window. Maria explained her choice of seat and blushed again. Alexander grinned understandingly in the spacious salon where other free chairs near the window. And it was clear that the woman had chosen a seat so that her husband would not be there to talk. John, by the way, sat in the back of the plane and slowly green-faced apparently. His body did not take air travel very well. "I can tell him not to dare to come near you," Alexander suggested in a confidential whisper. "I can be very persuasive." "Don't be," Maria sighed. "I have to go back, and I'm sorry." She fidgeted, looking for paper handkerchiefs in her purse. She began again, though she was terribly ashamed of it, to cry a little. "It's just he's." "Oh, I'm sorry. You know, sometimes you just need to talk it out. And if it makes you feel better and helps you to hold on, and we still have things to do, I'm ready to be your listener." Well, Maria bit her lip nervously. She wasn't the type to get along easily with people, much less complain about her family life to a man, not another woman. But she realized she really needed to talk. She'd been holding it all in, keeping it all inside. Even from sympathetic conversations with coworkers at work, she avoided. They did not know the nuances, but were aware that her husband left home. And Maria spoke up. She told it like it is, including the fact that she really thought she was a terrible klutz. "I'll offer once," Alexander said. "If you refuse, we'll continue a purely business relationship. Do you want me to be your boyfriend?" Maria rounded her eyes and stopped crying, and in general, it seemed to her a little that she flew into outer space. "What was that?" Alexander leaned closer to her and explained his idea. "How about the illusion of an affair?" he asked. "Sometimes things can move so quickly. Why not make your husband jealous? But we'll be in Singapore for a day." "What kind of affair in a day?" Maria muttered. "Jacob didn't say that, but we'll have to stay a little longer," Alexander said, and for some reason now he was not whispering, but speaking much louder, so that he could be heard from the other end of the plane. And for some reason he switched from English to his own language. Maria thought it was probably for her convenience. "You see, as of today, the bank and the vault have been taken over by a girl. She's his ex. And she is unfortunately aware of what we are looking to develop Jacob's father." Maria sighed at the news. And why, she wondered, hadn't she been told all the details while they were on the ground? Alexander explained that they would have to proceed carefully. Otherwise, this ex-Jacoba, using the power of the owner of the entire vault, could simply open the cell and take the recorder. Wait, Maria didn't understand. Can't I be the only one who can open it? That's right, it's legal, smiled Alexander. But there are additional keys to absolutely all the cells. Digital keys. They are kept for, let's say, emergency, specific situations at the one who owns the vault. For example, if the heirs of the person who owned the box or the police demand to open it. So we'll act quickly and carefully. We'll pick a time when she won't be there. Her office is in the same building. And if we show up when she's there, you start filling out the paperwork to open the box. And, well, Charlotte can get a quick report. But she doesn't know what I look like, does she? Maria frowned. Why don't I go alone? Why do any of you have to accompany me? Because Jacob is afraid you'll take the tape recorder and demand more money for it, or that our competitors will offer to buy it back from you, Charlotte. That's why he and I have to stay close to you at all times. You mean you're his lapdog, who's supposed to guard me? Maria was indignant. Well, first he demands that I fly, then he doesn't trust me. I don't like it at all. Theoretically, I can understand your indignation. Alexander looked at her carefully. But right now, we better turn off some of the emotions and just do what we need to do. And by the way, what about your ex? The last sentence was again said extremely quietly and in English. And Maria was feeling strangely resentful. Right now, directed at Jacob. And she was redirecting that negative energy at John. Okay, I agree. Let's pretend we're suddenly a couple. She said it, and then regretted it. Well, who would believe that a man like that would be interested in someone like her? All right, first, he leaned in closer to her. I want you to laugh, like we're having a nice conversation. I don't feel like laughing, Maria mumbled, and immediately squeaked and giggled because Alexander's fingers dug affectionately into her side. What are you doing? Stop it. She hissed, but he only smiled smugly and turned to a passing personal stewardess and told her to bring them non-alcoholic cocktails with coconut milk. I promise not to do that from now on, Alexander said. But the effect had been achieved. Maria looked out of her seat and realized it herself when she encountered John's jealous and judgmental gaze, craning his neck from his seat. Finally, the plane landed. On the flight, by the way, thanks to the comfort of the private jet, they even managed to take a little nap. And naturally, there was no fuss with getting the luggage, and the airport left quickly. The whole company was already waiting for the limousine. Maria, unfortunately, was sitting next to her ex-husband. John smiled at her and tried to put his hand on her shoulder, but she threw it away. Where are we? Maria asked as they pulled up to some fancy high-rise building. My apartment, Jacob said, and then clarified at the questioning look. One of many. I think it's a great option. 2 floors, 4 bedrooms, plenty of room for 2 people. Maria replied, thinking that it wasn't too late to ask to be separated from John. But she dismissed the thought. She wasn't afraid of John at all. And then, they really should probably talk about what to do when they got back. That is, what to do. It was clear to divorce. But Maria really hoped that it could all be done simply and easily. Since John had decided to leave once, well, obviously she should have already accepted this fact of his betrayal and not be a wimp and take him back. I'm tired from the road, John said. I'm not, blurted Maria, who suddenly realized that she wasn't ready for this important conversation right now. I'd like to see the city. May I? Why not? Alexander smiled. I can keep you company if you want. Very much. John looked jealous and disapproving again, but he was probably still really unwell after the plane, so he literally waved at everyone and said that he should only be escorted to a bedroom or a sofa because he was really sick. So, to see the city, Alexander said when they walked down the sidewalk at a leisurely, strolling pace. I don't care. I just want to get away from him now. It will be over soon, Alexander said. Maybe I'm minding my own business, but with this money, you can start your life over. Without him. I just don't know how, Maria shrugged. Who want me like this? You underestimate yourself. An educated, attractive young woman. I'm ugly. It seems that everything is bad with complexes and the situation is neglected. Alexander suddenly imperiously and at the same time gently turned her by the shoulders and looked into her eyes. And if I say that you are sexy and beautiful, I won't believe you, she replied and laughed heartily. Well, it's just impossible. Near you, probably so many beauties hanging around. Well, yes, right now there is one stubborn person, he continued with a smile. What can we do to make you stop being sad? You know, there's an ice cream parlor here. I'd love one. They went into the cafe and Maria chose a vase with an assortment of exotic flavors. All this mountain of ice cream was generously sprinkled with nuts, chocolate shavings, doused with caramel and whipped cream. And then when they left the cafe, she she just couldn't resist, but lingered at the shop window. There, in the window of a store, obviously an expensive boutique, stood a mannequin dressed in a seductive red dress. Do you like it? Alexander's heartfelt voice sounded above her ear. Very much, Maria said sincerely. As soon as I get the money and divorce, immediately go shopping. She said just what she thought. Suddenly so offended for John's sake, because he did not approve of any splurging on rags, as he called it. She years denied herself in updates. But in theory, you could start spending money now, Alexander said. Jacob wouldn't mind paying up front. I have one of his platinum cards. Really? Maria marveled. May I? I've been working for him for 8 years. Alexander smiled, but his gaze was deadly serious. And I only do what I'm authorized to do by my boss. So if you want to go shopping then, how about you try this on? He pointed to a magically beautiful scarlet outfit. Maria hesitated. She looked so simple. She was just afraid of being chased out of the boutique by such a plain, ordinary aunt. Let's go, as if reading her thoughts with doubts, Alexander said, and pushed the doors of the boutique. It was like a dream. Really, Maria had never had such pleasant and vivid dreams in her life. No one in the boutique treated her like a poor klutz. No, it was like being treated like a queen. Girls' consultants smiled sweetly and wore dresses, suits, and to clothes and handbags, shoes. Maria was tired of trying on everything, but she couldn't stop. And in the end, well, she had enough stuff for a good suitcase. How about lunch? Alexander suggested it when they finally left the boutique. She agreed. And then, well, somehow he talked her into one more place. John slept. Then the doctor came in, a pretty local girl Jacob had sent him, and gave him some vitamins to help him acclimatize, since he was having such a hard time with it. Now it's too late for that, she sighed, and for some reason it seemed that her own truth sounded false. How do you feel about lies? Suddenly Alexander asked. Bad. And if it is needed in order to, say, to click the nose of a bad guy, he smiled. Are you talking about the fact that we're cheating on my husband? Actually, no, not that. Although, it has something to do with him. So what is it? Maria's worried. You don't want him to get the money you can get from Jacob, do you? Of course I don't. It's all mine, Maria said with unexpected courage. You have character, Alexander grinned. Will you explain to me what this is all about? He nodded, and then he explained everything, and what he said sounded fantastic and crazy. John, we need to talk. Maria showed up at Jacob's apartment the next morning. I was so nervous last night. It was so sudden. John's eyes widened, but he didn't hesitate to ramble on about how sorry he was and how he believed that fate was giving them a second chance. He said they were going to finish up here, come back, and get on with their lives. He said they'd fix up the house, he'd start a business, they'd have a nice life. Jacob is very busy, Maria said, smiling sweetly at her husband. Alexander is not feeling well. He ate something wrong yesterday, and time is of the essence. Anyway, they told me to go get the tape recorder myself. But I'm a little scared to go alone. Will you walk me out? Of course I will. John nodded hurriedly. They left the apartment, the building. They got into the car Jacob had sent and drove to the building. I need to fill out some paperwork to gain access, Maria said, approaching a man in a business suit. I won't be long, she said, and together with him she disappeared behind the door. John shrugged his shoulders and waited. You must be John? A strange voice came from beside him. He jumped, turning around, and was simply speechless. Next to him stood such a beauty in a business white pantsuit, a gorgeous brunette, like from the cover of the book. She was accompanied by a man of a frail appearance. I'm a translator, he introduced himself. I have information that you are not very good in English, and Mrs. Charlotte Steele is very interested in you. John tensed. He had heard that name. It was the girl who was Jacob's rival. The beauty said something in a low voice, and the translator brought her words to John. She was making him a lucrative business proposition, and she wanted him to get her a tape recorder as soon as Maria got it, and she promised to pay John a very handsome sum for it, a sum that almost made his heart skip a beat when he heard it. John glanced at the door behind which his wife had disappeared. Then he thought that Jacob would probably be angry, but on the other hand, he'd have so much money. And no need to get a divorce, it's all his. He could go anywhere today and have fun not just with girls like Ariana, but with top models. It's a deal, John said, and then he waited. Maria came out of the door and smiling, twirled a small device in her hands. It's done. Now we can go to Jacob's office. John nodded. They walked out of the building. It was only a few steps to the car where they were supposed to go. He suddenly rushed to his wife and snatched the purse containing the tape recorder from her shoulder, then ran into the nearest alley. Charlotte had said that was where she would be waiting for him. John had never run so fast in his life. His heart was racing. He could hear his wife screaming in shock and indignation from behind him. He saw a gorgeous red sports car in front of him, the one Charlotte was supposed to be driving. And then John almost tripped and fell, even though there were no obstacles in front of his feet. But the thing was, he saw not only Charlotte, but Jacob himself, who was standing there with the look of a man who, well, had been waiting for him for a long time. John stopped. He didn't understand the thing. "So what do we have here?" Jacob said with a menacing grin. Meanwhile, John's wife had already come out of the alley behind him, along with Maria and several guards, real closets. Alexander also came out. "You must be very curious. You want to understand what's going on," Maria said. She revealed the truth to John. There was no Charlotte. That is, a girl with that name did exist, but she was not Jacob's rival. She was the head of his security service and owned the largest private security agency in the city. Then on the airplane, Alexander had deliberately switched to a language John could understand and raised his tone. He had already come up with this cunning plan and was doing everything he could to make sure John got the information he needed. The plan was to push John to betray his wife again, and at the same time to try to screw Jacob over by stealing one of his most important possessions. Maria found out about all this the night before when she was at Alexander's apartment. He had apologized to her, by the way, for lying to her on the plane. But now it was clear it was the perfect plan. "Basically, you smartass," Alexander said. "Now you weren't just trying to steal from Maria. You were trying to steal from a very serious person. You see, Jacob had already prepaid for the material recorded on that tape recorder. So, in fact, when Maria took it out of storage, it didn't even belong to her anymore. And now, I'll tell you what's in store for you for such a crime." Maria had never imagined before that her husband could turn red in the face and then pale in a matter of minutes. John was in shock. He was so humiliated, frightened, confused. He almost felt sorry for him. With an effort of will, however, Maria managed this dangerous feeling. Alexander offered John an alternative. He can answer for what he stole, or he can do otherwise. He gives Maria a divorce. He has no claim to the money she receives from Jacob. He disappears from her life forever. John, who was literally shaking with fright, babbled that he agreed to all of this. So they put him in a car and took him away. Alexander clarified to the airport and will be sent home. Charlotte said that actually, everything they had done now could be assessed very ambiguously, but she expressed the hope that her boss would keep the whole story completely confidential. Maria wanted to laugh and cry at the same time, because she was finally convinced of what a rotten man her husband was and finally broke up with him. The next few days in Singapore flew by unnoticed, but were very tense. But it was really necessary to sign a lot of documents on the transfer of the recorder, on the non-disclosure of information, and in her free time Maria walked around the city with Alexander. Not that there was any real romantic relationship between them, but they were definitely becoming friends at a minimum. And that was enough for Maria for now. She opened up to him that she seemed ready to try to fulfill her dream and become a photographer and travel journalist. And now she had the opportunities for that. Soon Maria returned home. Before realizing her dream, she still had a lot to settle. In particular, she sold a house in the suburbs and added money and got a nice apartment. She also paid for her parents to go to a very good sanatorium. They, by the way, asked her daughter if she wanted to move back to live. But Maria, though she felt very guilty in front of them again, replied that this is not possible because she has already formed in her life a completely different way. And what was her relief when in another conversation her parents, instead of once again reproaching her, said that, well, it's all clear to them. They realized that she is no longer a little girl who has to obey them, and that they accept her choice. Maria enrolled in courses for beginner photographers and bought the appropriate equipment. At first, she thought that all this can be somehow combined with her previous job, but then she realized that to fully master the new profession will have to quit the nursery. Her colleagues were very sorry to part with her. And then, about 2 months later, something happened. She and John were already divorced. He was being quiet and peaceful as agreed. But then, through mutual friends, Maria learned that John had suddenly been diagnosed with a very rare disease. Yes, she could have given a damn about him, but she, driven also by the thought that his cunning gamble forced him to give up part of her money, decided and paid for his treatment. It was very expensive. In fact, almost half of what she had gotten from Jacob, that is, almost all of what John would have gotten in a divorce, was now spent on his treatment. After which, however, he was still a weak and sickly man, who no longer cared about mistresses who could find the strength to go to work. Maria did not see John, and when she did, it supported her ex-husband for the last time. She somehow became much better, and all traces, wounds from the relationship with him, began to fade gradually. Another 6 months passed. Maria had already managed to visit Peru, Mexico, Madagascar, and the cat Tishka often traveled with her. And then she called Jacob. She had a very personal conversation with him. "Hi, how are your crops?" That's what Maria said when she appeared as an unexpected guest on the doorstep of a small farm in a Scandinavian country. Alexander couldn't believe his eyes. He had left his job with Jacob a few months ago and was settling into his new position. The time of year was right for it. Everything could be sown, seedlings planted. "I'm learning, but some things are in order," he answered confusedly and smiled warmly. I didn't expect it from myself." Maria sighed. "So, are you going to invite me in, or should we just stand on the doorstep?" "We?" Alexander asked. "Tishka with me," she said, picking up the bag carrier, in which the cat was impatiently scrabbling. He did not like confined spaces. Alexander, of course, invited her in. He made tea, and for Tishka poured fresh goat's milk. He kept a couple of these animals. They sat on the sofa again and talked again. But now there was a little more awkward silence between Alexander and Maria, and then he dared to ask her about the purpose of her visit, and she said that she really needed to see him. And that in general, she is not imposing and everything is fine with her. She is going to go to shoot the nature of Iceland. "And if we stay longer?" Alexander asked, and Maria looked at him attentively. "Is this an invitation to visit?" "It's an invitation to a date." He dared to say what he had been thinking about for a long time. And now everything must be for real. It was terribly embarrassing to admit even to herself, but Maria had come here to clarify once and for all what kind of relationship she had with Alexander and what she could hope for. And she was glad that all her hopes were now coming true. Another year or so passed and they were married. The wedding ceremony was very modest, literally for a few people, Alexander's relatives and close friends. When Maria threw the wedding bouquet of snow-white roses, Charlotte caught it, and Alexander secretly told his young wife that Jacob and this person had a secret affair for a long time. Charlotte is just a very independent girl, so she is in no hurry to get married. Life on the farm was very different from the urban lifestyle, but soon Maria got used to it and even began to find its charm. She did not completely abandon her chosen profession, especially since Alexander did not think to insist on it, but she simply did not travel so often, spending more time at home with her husband and children. She couldn't have her own babies, but she and Alexander decided after a while to take babies from the orphanage, and now they had a 3-year-old son named Michael and a 4-year-old daughter named Gerda. And even Tishka, the cat, had a family life when Alexander bought a cat, a gorgeous tri-colored fluffy person named Butterfly.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.